think death is the end. You think when your heart stops beating and your lungs collapse for the final time, that's it. Game over. Nothing left but decay and silence. But what if I told you that's a lie? What if I told you that in the cold, sterile halls of a morgue in Jakarta, multiple security cameras captured something that should be impossible? A corpse, lying motionless on a metal slab, suddenly moved its arm, turned its head, all without a single living soul in the room. No strings, no tricks, just dead flesh defying every law of nature we've built our understanding of reality upon. This isn't some grainy footage from the 1950s that you can dismiss as a hoax. This is high-definition, time-stamped, multi-angle documentation of the impossible. And once you see it, once you really understand what happened in that room, and you'll never look at death the same way again. The incident occurred at Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital in Jakarta, Indonesia, one of the largest and most respected medical facilities in Southeast Asia. It was a Tuesday night, around 2:47 a.m., when the morgue's automated monitoring system flagged unusual movement in Bay 7. The morgue attendant on duty, a man named Budi Santoso who had worked the graveyard shift for 11 years, initially dismissed it as a technical glitch. Sensors malfunction, cameras pick up shadows, it happens. But when he checked the live feed from his station, his blood turned to ice. On the screen, clear as day, was the body of a 43-year-old man who had been pronounced dead 6 hours earlier. Cause of death, massive cardiac arrest. No trauma, no suspicious circumstances. Just a heart that decided it had beaten its last beat. The man had been identified, his family notified, and his body prepared for the standard post-mortem examination scheduled for the following morning. He was covered with the regulation white sheet, his arms positioned at his sides, his head facing upward toward the fluorescent lights that never sleep in places like this. But now, on Budi's monitor, the man's right arm was no longer at his side. It was raised, bent at the elbow, the hand suspended in the air as if reaching for something only the dead can see. And as Budi watched, paralyzed by a fear he couldn't name, the corpse's head began to turn, slowly, deliberately. The movement was smooth, almost fluid, rotating from its original position until it faced the camera directly. Even through the grainy night vision filter, Budi could see the man's eyes were still closed. But the expression on the face had changed. The slack, peaceful look of death had been replaced by something else, something that looked almost like concentration. Budi's first instinct was to run. His second was to call security. His third, the one he actually followed, was to check the other camera angles. The morgue had 6 cameras covering different sections installed after a scandal 3 years prior involving stolen organs. What Budi saw on those other feeds made him question his sanity. Camera 2, positioned at the foot of the examination tables, showed the same movement from a different perspective. Camera 4, mounted on the eastern wall, captured the moment the arm first lifted, rising from the table with no visible cause. Camera 5, the wide-angle overview, I confirmed what Budi's rational mind refused to accept. There was no one else in the room. No hidden wires, no person manipulating the body, just a dead man moving on his own. The footage, which would later be analyzed by forensic experts, medical professionals, and paranormal investigators from 17 different countries, showed the movement lasting approximately 4 minutes and 37 seconds. During that time, the corpse's arm moved through several positions, the fingers flexing and extending in patterns that neurologists would later describe as inconsistent with post-mortem muscle spasms. The head completed a full 90-degree rotation, then returned to its original position. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The arm lowered back to the table, the head settled, and the body returned to the absolute stillness that defines death. Budi finally found the courage to enter the morgue. He brought 2 security guards with him, both armed with flashlights and the kind of bravado that evaporates the moment you're actually confronted with the impossible. They approached Bay 7 with the caution of men walking through a minefield. The body lay exactly as it should have, arms at sides, head facing up, sheet pulled to the chest. Booty checked for a pulse, knowing he wouldn't find one. The skin was cold. The flesh had the waxy quality of meat that's been refrigerated. There was no breath, no heartbeat, no sign of life whatsoever. But there was something else, something the cameras hadn't captured. When Booty pulled back the sheet to examine the body more closely, he noticed marks on the right arm. Fresh marks, pressure points on the skin that suggested the arm had been bearing weight, pressing against something. And when he checked the examination table, he found scratches on the metal surface near where the hand had been. Scratches that hadn't been there during the initial intake examination. Scratches that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. The hospital administration tried to contain the situation. They confiscated the security footage, ordered the staff to sign non-disclosure agreements, and released a statement attributing the movement to post-mortem muscle contractions, a well-documented phenomenon that can occur several hours after death. They brought in Dr. Siti Rahayu, the hospital's chief pathologist, to perform an immediate autopsy and provide a scientific explanation that would put the matter to rest. Dr. Rahayu had performed over 3,000 autopsies in her career. She had seen bodies in every conceivable state of decay and trauma. She had examined murder victims, accident casualties, and people who had died from diseases so rare they didn't have names in most languages. Nothing surprised her anymore, or so she thought. When she opened the body from Bay 7, when she peeled back the skin and examined the internal organs, she found something that made her hands shake for the first time in 20 years. The man's heart, the organ that had supposedly failed and caused his death, showed no signs of infarction. No blocked arteries, no tissue damage, no scarring. It was, by all medical standards, a healthy heart, a heart that should still be beating. Dr. Rahayu checked and rechecked her findings. She consulted with 2 other pathologists, both of whom confirmed what she was seeing. The cause of death listed on the man's chart was wrong. Or rather, there was no identifiable cause of death at all. The man's body had simply stopped functioning, as if someone had flipped a switch and turned off all his biological processes at once. But that wasn't the strangest part. When Dr. Rahayu examined the brain, she found unusual electrical activity. Not the random firing of dying neurons, but organized patterns. Patterns that suggested consciousness. Patterns that, according to every textbook she'd ever read, should not exist in a brain that had been deprived of oxygen for over 6 hours. She ran the tests 3 times, certain she was making a mistake. The results were consistent. Somehow, impossibly, parts of this dead man's brain were still active. The footage leaked, of course, yet it always does. Within 48 hours, the security camera video was circulating on social media, racking up millions of views. Skeptics called it a hoax, claiming the hospital had staged the entire thing for publicity. Believers saw it as proof of life after death, evidence that the soul lingers in the body before departing for whatever comes next. Religious leaders offered interpretations ranging from demonic possession to divine intervention. Scientists proposed theories involving cadaveric spasms, rigor mortis, and the release of adenosine triphosphate in muscle tissue. But none of these explanations could account for all the facts. Cadaveric spasms are instantaneous, occurring at the moment of death, not hours later. Rigor mortis causes stiffening, not fluid movement. And the ATP theory, while scientifically sound, he couldn't explain the coordinated nature of the movements or the electrical activity in the brain. Dr. Marcus Webb, a neurologist from Johns Hopkins University who reviewed the autopsy findings, stated in an interview that What we're seeing here challenges our fundamental understanding of death. We define death as the irreversible cessation of all biological functions. But if the brain is showing organized electrical activity hours after clinical death, then perhaps our definition needs to be reconsidered. The family of the deceased, understandably traumatized by the entire ordeal, refused to speak to the media. But the man's wife, in a single statement released through her lawyer, said something that haunts everyone who heard it. 3 days before he died, my husband told me he'd been having dreams. Dreams where he was trapped in his own body, unable to move or speak, but fully aware of everything around him. He said it felt like being buried alive inside himself. I told him it was just stress, that he should see a doctor, but he never got the chance. This revelation opened up a terrifying possibility. What if the man hadn't been fully dead when he was brought to the morgue? What if he'd been in some kind of locked-in state, a condition where the body appears lifeless but consciousness remains? It's rare, but it happens. There are documented cases of people being declared dead only to wake up hours or even days later. But those people showed vital signs, however faint. This man had shown none. No pulse, no respiration, no response to painful stimuli. By every medical standard, he was dead, unless our standards are wrong. And the incident at Sipto Mangunkusumo Hospital wasn't isolated. Once the footage went viral, other cases began to surface. A morgue in Sao Paulo reported similar movements captured on their security system 2 years earlier, footage they dismissed and deleted. A funeral home in Manchester described an incident where a body sat up on the preparation table, witnessed by 3 embalmers who quit their jobs the next day. A medical examiner in Detroit admitted to seeing unexplained movements in corpses throughout her career. Movements she'd attributed to gases and muscle contractions because the alternative was too disturbing to consider. What if death isn't the clean, definitive line we've drawn? What if it's a process, a gradual dimming rather than an instant switch? And what if during that process some part of us remains aware, trapped in a body that no longer responds, unable to signal that we're still here, still conscious, still experiencing everything being done to us? The examinations, the cutting, the embalming, all of it felt, all of it endured with no way to scream or beg for it to stop. The Jakarta body was eventually cremated at the family's request. The hospital updated its protocols, installing additional monitoring equipment and requiring more extensive verification of death before bodies are transferred to the morgue. Dr. Rahayu left her position 6 months later, citing personal reasons, though colleagues say she became obsessed with the case, spending hours reviewing the footage and autopsy results, searching for an explanation that would let her sleep at night. Budi Santoso still works the graveyard shift at the morgue. He says he's seen other movements since that night, small things that most people wouldn't notice. A finger twitching, an eyelid fluttering, the slight rise and fall of a chest that should be forever still. He doesn't report them anymore. What would be the point? The cameras see what they see. The dead do what they do. And those of us still living are left to wonder what awaits us when our time comes. Because here's the truth that no one wants to face. We don't know what death is. We've created definitions and protocols, drawn lines and established criteria, all to give ourselves the illusion of control over the one thing we can never truly control. We tell ourselves that death is peaceful, that it's like going to sleep, that there's nothing to fear. But what if we're wrong? What if those final moments or hours or days are nothing like we've imagined? What if the body that changed position in that Jakarta morgue was trying to tell us something? Trying to warn us that the boundary between life and death is far more permeable, far more terrifying than we've ever dared to admit. The footage still exists, archived on servers around the world, watched by millions who can't look away. Some see it as entertainment, a creepy story to share at parties. Others see it as a wake-up call, a reminder that our understanding of existence is built on assumptions that may be fundamentally flawed. And a very few, see it for what it really is. A glimpse behind the curtain, a momentary revelation of the horror that awaits us all. Not the horror of non-existence, but something far worse, the horror of existence without escape, consciousness without agency, awareness without end. So the next time you see a body lying still and cold, the next time you attend a funeral or pass by a morgue, remember the man in Jakarta. Remember that his arm moved and his head turned and his brain showed activity when it should have been dark and silent. Remember that death might not be the mercy we've been promised. And pray, if you believe in anything worth praying to, that when your time comes, when your heart beats its last and your lungs draw their final breath, that you actually get to leave, that you're not trapped inside the shell of yourself, screaming into the void while the world moves on without you, convinced you're gone when you're still there, still aware, still suffering in ways the living can't imagine. The body changed position. The cameras captured it all. And now you know. Now you'll always know. Sweet dreams.